Yes, there they go. Look out!
When war became imminent, various groups in the Air Force were offered a chance to volunteer for service in the Navy. I volunteered. I'm not sure why. I think perhaps it was because I'd seen Illustrious being launched on the newsreels, but I've never regretted it. I joined 819 Squadron at Ford in Sussex, forming up for HMS Illustrious. After a workup in Bermuda, we went out and joined the Eastern Mediterranean Fleet on the 3rd of September 1940, and with our radar and our Fulmar fighters and our swordfish, which could do bombing and torpedoing, we created quite a lot of trouble in the Eastern Mediterranean, including, of course, the operation against Taranto.
Up to that time, the Mediterranean fleet never went to sea without being bombed absolutely silly. But high-level bombing very, very rarely hit the target. So it was very unnerving, and they did lose a few ships. But come the advent of the Illustrious, with lovely Fulmar fighters, the first carrier to have radar, and primitive fighter direction, birth of fighter direction, which was actually more important, in my view, from a naval point of view, even than Taranto.
We had bought out the Fulmar fighter as our fighter squadron in the Illustrious. And up till then, the Mediterranean fleet, the only carrier there was Eagle, a fairly elderly carrier, and had no fighters on board. And the Italian Air Force was able to, their high-level bombers were able to bomb with impunity, bomb the Mediterranean fleet with impunity, because nobody was able to intercept them. But I remember well that when we first joined the Mediterranean fleet, some of the bombers appeared overhead, and the Fulmars went up and smacked them down. And the impact on the Mediterranean fleet and the commander-in-chief, indeed, as he said in his memoirs, was enormous, because now they had an effective fighter defense against the Italians.
After Taranto, Hitler decided that this was something must be done about this. So they sent one of the most highly trained Fliegerkorps to Sicily and to attack the fleet. Well, of course, they did, and our fighter defense was totally inadequate to massed dive bombing. My lords and masters were getting very cocky. In fact, dear old Andrew Cunningham, marvellous man. But anyway, old Admiral Cunningham suddenly found every time the Italians produced a shadower, we managed to hit it down, you see. And he got overconfident. So the great convoy on January the 6th was one of these terrific ones where we were to meet ships from Gibraltar, we were to do sweeps in the Adriatic, we were to replenish Malta, you name it, we've got it. And the Illustrious was taken far too close to Pantelleria and Sicily.
On January the 7th, we put to sea and sailed westward with the whole fleet. And when we got to sea, the commander told us that we were to go as far as west of Sicily and to take over a convoy of ships which was being passed through the Sicilian Narrows by the Western Mediterranean fleet. In other words, it had come from Gibraltar. And we were to look after it after it had come through the Narrows. Well, personally, I didn't think much of this. We'd not been attacked at all, really, except the firing from Bardia. But I was living in very much of a fool's paradise. Nothing happened for 2 days, and we steamed westward. And then came January the 10th, 1941, my 18th birthday. And it was one of the most dreadful days I think I've ever spent.
January 10th, 1941 was a typical day. We had been up before daylight with the first range of anti-submarine patrols. These had continued through the morning.
We were meeting a convoy in the middle of the Mediterranean off Pantelleria, and we'd seen the destroyer Gallant with no bow. She'd hit a mine, and our aircraft took off for the lunchtime range for the anti-submarine patrol, and there were some fighters took off as well. And we were not landing. 819 Squadron were not landing on any aircraft. Otherwise, I would have remained on the flight deck, and I would have taken cover and rescue pom-pom, and I wouldn't be talking to you now.
At 7 o'clock in the morning, I was just about to go up onto what was called the flag deck, where all the signalling was done from, to take a sight. And I saw what looked like a large fin in the water. And I asked somebody what it was, and somebody said, "Oh, it's an aircraft that's been down." But it wasn't. It was the bow section of the destroyer Greyhound, which was being one of our escorting destroyers. She'd hit a mine, and the whole of her bows had been blown off. So she was taken in tow by the destroyer Mohawk, and I think the crew who were marooned in the bows were taken off also. But that was our first introduction to the danger that lurked underneath. A cruiser called Bonaventure, which we could see over the horizon, and she was engaging an Italian destroyer, and she sank that. They had an engagement just on the horizon, but you could just watch it. So those were two incidents very early on in the day.
This morning, we took off on a recce, which lasted 3 hours, 15 minutes. I came back to the ship and was being debriefed when from the AIO we were told there's a large group of enemy aircraft coming, warn the fighters on deck. So I bumbled down to do that. I then went down to the wardroom where I was going to have lunch, and suddenly bombs started bursting like billy-o, and all the guns were fired.
About 12:20, I was just about to have my lunch. Brown Windsor soup, I seem to remember, when the awful bugle call of repel aircraft came over the public address system. And it goes like this, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Everybody translated as, "There's an aircraft overhead, there's an aircraft overhead." And you would shoot off to your action station, which is what I did.
Action station sounded at about 12:30. Normally, we had a fair amount of time before anything happened. I was very, very thirsty, and I thought I could grab a drink in the recreation space one deck down from the flight deck. So off I went on my way to my action station in the hangar. I had the drink in my hand when the guns opened up, and I don't know if it was our guns or bombs in the water, but my drink floated away. The canteen assistant and myself beat a hasty retreat.
Suddenly, the gun that we were standing behind opened fire. Nothing had been said, but obviously they saw something. And they opened fire. They could see these airplanes coming down. So we went to our action stations, and mine was down helping the medics. That soon got full up. Then they were using our mess and lots of places they were using for.
And I was now on the 2 deck, underneath the flight deck. I started going down from 2 to 3 to 4 deck, down to the hangar. But this meant going down ladders which were open to the ship's side, and there were a lot of near misses and shrapnel and water flying around there. And straight ahead of me was the sick bay, which the door was open, so I thought, well, I'll go in there for a bit.
I went in there. The scuttles were not closed. The curtains were horizontal. Bottles were flying around. The noise was indescribable. In amongst it all, I heard an aircraft pulling out of a dive. It was something I had not heard before, but I knew what it was. It was a Stuka, and I knew we had problems.
Now, I was still the midshipman of B turret, and of course there was nothing to be done in the turret at an air raid. There was a hatch in the top of the turret, which I'd never noticed before. And the crew of the turret, plus the officer of the turret and the midshipman of the turret, me, had to go up on top of the turret, and the ratings would man this .5 machine gun, which was nothing more than a pop gun. I mean, it was quite ridiculous. And be standing in full view of the attacking bombers. Now, this was the first time that I'd been bombed, and first of all, what happened was that an Italian aircraft came quite low, swooped quite low, and fired a torpedo at us. And somebody said, I hope it's not set to W. A torpedo can be set to imitate the letter W by going first one way and then the other, so that it fools the person who's trying to maneuver the ship to evade it. Anyway, this slid past us, thank goodness, and nothing happened. But then one of the ratings pointed to the sky, and he said, there they are, and hanging up at about 5,000 or 6,000 feet were these aircraft which looked just like sort of vultures, which they probably were in the sense that they were looking down at the kill. And these were the Ju87 Stukas, which had done such havoc as advance artillery in the French campaign.
So, being an inquisitive creature, I popped up to the starboard after gangway to see what was going on. And I saw one bomb burst there, within 50 or 100 yards, and a bloody great bang inside the ship. And we started taking our quota of bombs.
And they started down with their sirens going. And I've never heard such an awful banshee sound in all my life. It was terrifying. and they came so low that you could see the claws holding the bomb coming down underneath the aircraft, and then the bomb, quite oval, being released, and you watched fascinated as it came towards you. Well, they missed us, fortunately, and we were not the main target. Meanwhile, there was an awful, devilish noise going on, because all the 4.5 anti-aircraft guns were going, and so were the pom-poms, which were these 8 machine guns all in a row, plus our own machine guns. That, when you take the whine of the attacking aircraft and so on, made it a noise out of hell. And then somebody shouted, "Illustrious is hit." Now, that was our dear aircraft carrier who'd taken the aircraft at Taranto. And she'd obviously been the main target, because Hitler and Mussolini had realized that if an attack on Taranto could be made like that with the use of an aircraft carrier, the thing to do was to eliminate it.
As the raid went on, there was this rather unusual feeling as if somebody had lifted the ship 2 or 3 inches out of the water and dropped it back in again, and I realized that we'd been hit. And this happened again, and again, and again. Eventually the noise stopped, and some sailors came down from the flight deck, obviously from the pom-poms on the starboard side, the port side. One of them had been wounded. He was not very badly wounded, and I remember him saying, "Never mind me, look after the rest." I decided it was time. I went down to the hangar.
I was off flying at that particular time because I'd had some air trouble. And my action station was meant to be with the command operations up on the bridge. When action stations went on that particular day, I was on my way by the quickest route, which is through the hangar, up to the bridge, when a bomb went off in the after lift well of the hangar. I was caught by the bomb, and my own impression was that there was a mass of flame and smoke, and that the ship was spinning around me. In actual fact, what happened was that I was caught by the blast through the after hangar door, which took me along a passageway and took me through 2 watertight doors, which actually were open at that stage. So by sheer luck, I was shot straight through 2 doors, whereas if I'd been diverted just the smallest bit, I'd been pulled up against a bulkhead.
You can imagine that was pretty chaotic. 2 things. There was one chap who went up with me. When he went up, he had a face just like yours. After the bomb burst, his face was entirely black, burnt, black. All it did to me was to knock off my cap, and I remember being very anxious to get hold of my cap again. But I went down below, because obviously things were a bit odd, and I knew in my cabin there was a torch, and everything seemed to be very dark down below. And there I discovered the after-damage control party, most of them stunned. I found my torch, and I found the after-damage control officer being killed. So, in a fit of unwonted enthusiasm, I became after-damage control officer for the next 2 hours.
You do endless training in the Navy for this sort of thing, and you have it dinned into you. You don't know why, but it's close the ventilation, put out the fires, rescue the wounded, apply first aid, and you go on doing this again, and you think, my God, I've done this so much, I'm bored stiff. And in this particular case, this is what happened. Your training takes over, and although you are shattered and bruised, You do it. And I was putting out fires and rescuing wounded when I was caught by the next bomb. And the next thing I knew was that I was on the quarterdeck, laid out, and somebody rescued me. Anyhow, I came to, and after a very short period, I recovered. Now, what had happened in those early bombers was that the wardroom, which was under the hangar, on the after end of the hangar, had been smashed to pieces. The wardroom was the after first aid dressing station in that ship. The sick bay, the forward end of the ship, was the forward one, so you had two sick bays in effect, and the last one had been wiped out by the bombs. So instead of being wounded being taken to the wardroom, they were brought out into the quarterdeck, and there were a whole mass of people with all sorts of burns and shatters and things being laid out in the quarterdeck as they were brought out by various first aid parties.
I went back up the 3 decks onto the flight deck, and as my eyes came level with the deck, the first thing that I saw was the limbless torso of a man, mouth open, eyes open, body burnt, and opposite him a steel pom-pom on its mounting.
Taking a direct hit.
And it was under this mounting that I would have sheltered if aircraft had been landing on. I looked down aft. The ship was going around in circles, almost in sight of Pantelleria, obviously out of control. The after lift was on end in its well. There was a hole almost on the centre line of the armour-plated flight deck, smoke coming out of it, steam coming off the deck where water had been put down. The forward lift was bent like the roof of a house. It was a beautiful day. The sea was calm, and I thought the sea looks a better place than this ship. And when I had another look, all the other ships that were there with us that day when we picked up that convoy for Greece were all disappearing over the horizon. A couple of us ran a hose from starboard side forward down to the hole in the flight deck, but not very much water came out. The crew from the forward 4.5-inch guns were yelling for ammunition. Presumably their supply system had broken down. The after gun turrets were obviously damaged from the bombs that had gone down the lift well, but they had some ammunition. We started carrying this up the flight deck. A, I'm not very big. B, the shells are very heavy, and I only managed 2. And our feet were getting very, very hot with the heat from the flight deck.